Farseer, billionaire humiliates pregnant black employee, but the secret she hid about the baby's father is unbelievable. Amelia Johnson stepped into Edward Ed Hastings' sleek office, her heart racing. The environment, with its glass walls and panoramic city view, exuded power. However, she felt that today would be different. With her hand resting on her belly, which was beginning to show the first signs of pregnancy, she took a deep breath, trying to summon the courage to reveal the news that would. The room was filled with colleagues, all wearing expressions of anticipation and curiosity. Ed, seated in his imposing chair, regarded Amelia with an air of indifference. The atmosphere, which should have been celebratory, was charged with tension. "Amelia, do you have any updates on the project we've been waiting for?" he asked, his tone a mix of impatience and disdain. "Actually, Ed, I'd like to share something important before we start," Amelia began, her voice trembling slightly. I'm Pete." The reaction was instantaneous. An awkward silence enveloped the room. Ed's eyes narrowed and he leaned slightly forward, as if the news had taken him by surprise. "Pregnant? Is that all you have to say? You do realize this could be a significant burden for the company, right?" Ed's tone was cutting and his words echoed like a sharp blade. Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. "Ed, I hope you can understand that this doesn't change my professionalism or my commitment to work," she tried to argue, her voice rising to be heard above the murmurs that began to spread through the room. "Do you think this is a joke?" Ed continued, ignoring Amelia's defense. "You think we can just overlook the fact that you're about to become a liability for all of us? The office isn't a place for personal dilemmas." "We have goals to meet!" The nervous laughter of some colleagues was deafening. The look of disgust on Amelia's face was unmistakable, and she felt tears threatening to spill. "I'm not a liability, Ed. I'm here to work and contribute just as I always have," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Then you should have thought twice before putting yourself in this situation," Ed shot back, a sarcastic smile on his face. "We need people who are completely committed, not employees bringing personal issues into the workplace." Amelia looked around, realizing that her colleagues' gazes were fixed on her, some filled with compassion, others merely curious. The humiliation struck her like a blow. "This isn't fair," she murmured, feeling exposed and vulnerable. "I am a dedicated professional and deserve respect." "Respect? You want respect?" Ed replied, standing up and running his hands nervously through his hair. "Then maybe you should have thought about the consequences before making your personal decisions. Life is full of choices, Amelia, and at this moment, your choice isn't good for the company." With her face burning with shame, Amelia turned and left the room, the pressure of tears almost unbearable. Once in her office, she allowed herself to cry, the pain of humiliation cutting deep. "I won't let him take me down," she whispered to herself as she wiped her tears. Determination began to take shape in her heart. She knew she needed to be strong, not just for herself, but for her child. Meanwhile, Ed remained in his office, a triumphant expression on his face. He didn't realize the impact of his words. He was too busy reveling in his position. "No one can oppose me," he murmured, looking out the window, aware that power and wealth shielded him. Yet amid his arrogance, a seed of doubt began to sprout, a feeling that life might not be as simple as he believed. Victoria Hastings observed the interaction between her husband, Ed, and Amelia Johnson with growing concern. The Canary Wharf office, filled with luxury and ostentation, felt more like a glass cage, where emotions were contained and secrets were kept under lock and key. Hearing Ed belittle Amelia's pregnancy made Victoria's heart ache. How could he be so cruel? What had happened to the man she fell in love with? After the humiliating meeting, Victoria distanced herself from the office, seeking refuge in a nearby cafe. As she sipped her cappuccino, her mind raced. Why did Ed act that way? What's going on between him and Amelia, she pondered, biting her lower lip in an effort to contain the tempest of feelings swirling within her. She decided she needed to dig deeper into Amelia's life and Ed's past. That night, sitting in her elegant home office, Victoria opened her laptop and began to research. The pages unfolded into a complex web of stories, and as she delved into the information, a pattern began to emerge. Amelia's mother. Wait, I remember her, she thought as memories started to flow. The woman had a striking presence with a smile that could light up any room. Victoria and her mother-in-law had met at a few parties but had never become close. However, there was something more, a connection that couldn't be ignored. Ed always talked about an old childhood friend, Victoria murmured to herself, recalling the stories shared during family dinners. But why has he never mentioned Amelia? The unease grew within her, and her determination to uncover the truth solidified. The next day, Victoria decided to confront Ed. During dinner, as the candles flickered softly, she turned to him, her voice tinged with a mix of firmness and concern. "Ed, we need to talk about Amelia." He appeared relaxed, the red wine in his glass reflecting the soft light of the table. "About what, dear? That assistant who got herself pregnant? There's nothing to discuss. Don't be insensitive, Ed. She's going through a tough time, and you should care," Victoria replied, her tone rising slightly. "My job is to keep the company running, Victoria. Her pregnancy is a burden. I can't afford to have employees who aren't 100% focused," Ed retorted, his arrogance bubbling like poison. Victoria took a deep breath, trying to contain her frustration. "This isn't just about the company. What you don't understand is that a person's life is at stake here. And why have you never talked about her mother? You and she were friends, weren't you?" Ed paused for a moment, and a darker expression crossed his face. "The past is the past, Victoria. I don't see why I should delve into it now. Because it could affect the present and the future. You know Amelia is a strong woman, but she needs support right now. And there's something else, Ed. I feel like you're hiding something," Victoria insisted, her piercing gaze fixed on Ed's face. He looked away, and the tension at the table grew. "I'm not hiding anything, you're overreacting." "Then tell me, Ed, what do you really feel for her? What happened between you and her mother?" Victoria asked, her voice now almost a whisper, but heavy with emotion. Ed's response was an awkward silence. He stood up abruptly, leaving the table while Victoria followed him, feeling the need to uncover the truth. "Ed, please. You can't just run away. Before we continue with this gripping story, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories. And let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from." But he didn't look back. Victoria was left alone, with the feeling that there was something deeper in the relationship between Ed and Amelia, something that could shatter all the walls they had built over the years. She knew she needed to continue her investigation, not only for Amelia but also for the integrity of her marriage and for the truth that loomed over them like a threatening shadow. Amelia Johnson felt lost in a sea of emotions. After the public humiliation she had suffered at the hands of Edward Hastings, her confidence was shaken, but her determination not to let this bring her down grew stronger each day. In search of refuge, she found solace in Marcus, an artist friend who had always believed in her potential, someone who could help her channel her pain into something constructive. In a small studio lit by wide windows, Amelia and Marcus met frequently. The walls were covered with vibrant paintings, each telling a different story. Marcus, with his carefree demeanor, encouraged Amelia to let loose. "Come on, Amy. Don't be afraid to put your soul into this painting. Let it flow," he said, passing a colorful brush between his fingers. Amelia hesitated, staring at the blank canvas before her, but Marcus's words echoed in her mind. "You don't need to please anyone. Just express what you're feeling." With a deep sigh, she began mixing colors, allowing her emotions to transform into brushstrokes. With each movement, her frustrations and sadness took shape and color, and the canvas began to come to life. "You're amazing, you know that?" Marcus commented as he watched. "This palette is powerful. You're translating your struggle into art. It's liberating." Amelia smiled shyly, but inside she felt a wave of relief. She was finally allowing herself to feel and express her pain. The vibrant colors represented not only her agony, but also the hope for a better future. Afternoons turned into weeks, and the connection between Amelia and Marcus deepened. One afternoon, they were at a contemporary art exhibition showcasing works from local artists. Amelia, nervous, looked around, observing how people were moved by the stories each piece conveyed. "Look at this, Amy. People are connecting with the art. You can do that too," Marcus encouraged her. When it finally came time for her to show her work, Amelia felt her heart race. What if they don't like it? What if this is all a waste? She thought. But as she lifted her head and saw the audience admiring her work, a warmth spread through her body. Each gaze that turned toward her painting seemed to bring a new spark of hope. The colors she had chosen reflected her struggle and her identity as a black woman in an unforgiving corporate world. After the exhibition, still enveloped in joy and adrenaline, Marcus approached her. "Amy, you were fantastic. People really felt your message. You should do this more often." He hesitated for a moment, his gaze locked onto hers. I wanted to tell you something." Amelia, still in a state of euphoria, looked at Marcus with curiosity. "What is it?" I like you, Amelia. Not just as a friend, but in a deeper way. You're an incredible woman and you deserve to be happy." Marcus's confession took Amelia by surprise. She felt a whirlwind of emotions: joy, confusion, and fear. "Marcus, I don't know if I'm ready for this. I'm so focused on dealing with everything that's happened. I understand, I really do. I don't want to pressure you. I just wanted you to know that I'm here, regardless of what you decide," he replied softly, respecting her space. Amelia nodded, admiring his understanding. "Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot to me. But for now, I need to focus on my fight. I can't afford to get distracted." The following weeks were an emotional whirlwind. Despite the growing connection with Marcus, Amelia felt torn. The battle against Ed still loomed in her mind, a shadow that wouldn't let her be at peace. However, art began to become her voice, her cry for freedom in an environment that tried to silence her. And so, amid paints and brushes, Amelia began to rediscover her inner strength. Each new piece she created wasn't just a reflection of who she was, but also a promise that she wouldn't let anyone define or humiliate her again. She was preparing for the battle ahead, armed not only with her artistic creations but with a newfound determination to fight for her dignity and that of her child. James was sitting in his small apartment in London, his gaze lost in the rain-streaked window. The news of Amelia's pregnancy hit him like a punch to the gut. He couldn't believe she would be going through this alone, especially with a boss like Ed Hastings. The weight of responsibility began to settle on his shoulders. "She needs me," he thought. Making a decision, he picked up his phone and started making some calls. "Hi, Marcus. It's James. Can you meet me? I need some information about Ed's company," he said, his voice steady but anxious. Marcus agreed to meet, and soon the two were gathered at a cafe near the university where they had met. "You don't look so good, man," Marcus commented, observing James's anxious expression. "What's going on?" "It's Amelia. She's pregnant, and I feel like I need to do something. Ed isn't trustworthy, and I'm afraid of what he might do to her," James confessed, staring intently at the cup of coffee before him. "You know it's not easy to challenge a guy like that," Marcus said hesitantly. "But if you really want to help, maybe we should investigate more about the company and its practices. It's a good way to expose the truth." And James nodded, feeling a wave of determination. "Yes, I'm going to do this. I can't leave Amelia alone at this moment. She deserves more than to be treated like a burden." The conversation flowed, and they began to devise a plan to gather information about Ed's company. Over time, James managed to contact some of Amelia's colleagues who also felt oppressed, and together, they started to collect accounts of discrimination and sexism in the workplace. In a clandestine meeting, James called together several employees he knew were willing to speak out. They met at a discreet bar, away from the curious eyes of the company. "Thank you for being here," James began, his voice firm but low. "We're here because we all know that the situation at the company is unsustainable. The way Ed treats Amelia is just the tip of the iceberg. I can't believe he had the audacity to speak to her that way in the meeting," commented one of the employees, Clara, with indignation. "I've seen this happen to other women, and we can't remain silent any longer." James paused, observing the determined faces before him. "We need to take action. We can't let this toxic culture continue. What happened to Amelia could happen to any one of us. How about we create a petition? We can gather support from everyone in the company who feels the same way." "I'm in," Clara said, and quickly others began to agree. "We need to show Ed that he is not above the law. He needs to understand that his actions have consequences." James smiled, feeling a surge of hope. "Great. Let's start collecting signatures and accounts. We need to do this in an organized manner and unite with those who also feel wronged. Together we can be stronger." As the group dispersed, James felt a wave of determination. "I can't fail Amelia," he thought. He was resolved to expose the truth about Ed Hastings and ensure that the executive assistant received the dignity and respect she deserved. Meanwhile, at the company, Ed continued in his bubble of arrogance, unaware that his reputation was about to be challenged by those he considered beneath him. James knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was unwilling to back down. Amelia and everyone else deserved a chance, and he was ready to fight for her. Sir Malcolm Hastings, an imposing man with a penetrating gaze, was sitting in his luxurious living room at the family mansion, reviewing the company's financial documents when he received the news about Amelia Johnson's pregnancy. He knew this revelation was not just a personal event, it was a ticking time bomb that could explode the Hastings family's reputation if it wasn't controlled. With a deep sigh, he called his son Ed for a conversation. Ed entered the room with an air of arrogance, as if nothing could threaten his world. He wore an upscale suit that displayed his status and power. "What is it, Dad? I'm busy," he said, not looking up, focused on his phone. "You're not so busy that you can't hear what I have to say," Sir Malcolm replied, his voice deep and firm. He looked at Ed with an expression that mingled disappointment and concern. "Amelia's pregnant. This is not just an insignificant detail. It's a problem." Ed raised an eyebrow, dismissing it. "A problem? What does that have to do with me? She's just an employee. It's not my responsibility." "You know very well that's not true," Sir Malcolm insisted, rising from his armchair. He began pacing the room, his powerful stride reflecting his agitation. "Her pregnancy could tarnish the family name. People will speculate, and your public image will suffer. You need to take action." "I'm not worried about what people think. I am Ed Hastings," he exclaimed, arrogance spilling from his voice. "If people can't handle it, that's their problem. Don't be foolish, Ed. This is a crucial moment. You need to think clearly and act appropriately," Sir Malcolm said, stopping and locking eyes with his son. "You must manage this situation before it becomes unmanageable. You need to get rid of her." "Get rid of her? You want me to fire a pregnant employee?" "That's unacceptable," Ed replied, his voice rising. "If I do that, the press will call me a monster. You know that's not an option. So what do you suggest? Let it drag on? Do you think public opinion will ignore this?" Sir Malcolm paused, taking a deep breath. "You need a plan. What will you do?" Ed began to feel cornered, the mounting pressure from his father and the weight of the situation starting to shake his confidence. "I can offer her a leave, maybe a bonus. That way she can step away and won't be a problem for a while." Sir Malcolm shook his head, disappointed. "That won't resolve anything. What you need to do is ensure that there's no connection between you and her in people's minds. You need to show that you're in control. You must maintain your image intact." Ed looked down, contemplating his father's words. The idea of getting rid of Amelia seemed increasingly tempting, but something within him hesitated. What if she doesn't accept? What if she decides to speak out? That could backfire on me, he murmured, doubt starting to creep in. "You must be firm, my son. Remember, what matters is the family, the Hastings name. Reputation is everything. Don't let a woman cause your downfall," Sir Malcolm said, his tone softening but still firm. "You are a Hastings. You need to act like one." The conversation hung heavily in the air between father and son. Ed knew his father was right in many ways, but the thought of hurting Amelia troubled him. He wanted to be a leader, but the situation demanded a coldness he wasn't sure he possessed. However, looking at his father, he saw the determination in his eyes and realized he could not fail. "I will handle this, Dad. I'll do what needs to be done," Ed finally replied, his voice lower but resolute. The pressure on his shoulders was increasing, but now he felt he had no choice. The family's reputation was at stake, and he was willing to do whatever it took to protect the Hastings legacy. The Hastings mansion was enveloped in a palpable tension. The dinner, which would typically be a celebratory occasion, now felt like an emotional battlefield. The soft candlelight danced across the faces of those present but failed to soften the rigidity in the air. Victoria Hastings, her gaze fixed on her husband, Ed Hastings, felt adrenaline coursing through her veins. The moment had come to confront him about his secrets and his devastating choices. "Ed," Victoria began, her voice firm yet tinged with vulnerability. "We need to talk about Amelia. What happened in the meeting was unacceptable." Ed, already wrapped up in his own arrogance, merely glanced at her disdainfully. "She's using her pregnancy as an excuse. It's not my fault she can't keep it professional." He leaned back in his chair, contempt evident in his tone. "How can you say that?" Victoria couldn't contain her indignation. "She's a talented woman dealing with a new life. You humiliated her in front of everyone. And that's not all. I found out you knew her mother long before she came into your life." Ed hesitated, the defiant look in his eyes faltering slightly. "What you know about my friendship with her mother is none of your business, Victoria. What's at stake here is the company." "And what else?" Victoria blurted out, her voice rising. "What else are you hiding? You care more about your image than the life of a woman you look down upon. What happened between you and her mother?" The question hung in the air like a bomb ready to explode. Realizing he could no longer avoid the conversation, Ed took a deep breath. It's a past I'd rather leave behind. It has nothing to do with this now, Victoria. Life is complicated and I'm trying to keep things under control. Control? Victoria laughed sarcastically. That's not control, Ed. That's selfishness. You don't think about the consequences of your actions. Look at Amelia. She deserves respect, and you should be concerned about how what you're doing is affecting her. I don't have to answer to you, Victoria, Ed snapped, but his voice was starting to waver. The company is my priority. At that moment, Amelia entered the room unaware that the confrontation had already begun. She paused, sensing the heavy atmosphere. Sorry to interrupt, she said, standing tall even with her racing heart. But I'd like to speak. Victoria gestured for her to come closer. Amelia, please come in. We're just discussing a few things. Amelia hesitated, but determination pushed her forward. I can't stay silent anymore. Ed, you publicly humiliated me. You have no idea what that did to me. Ed opened his mouth to protest, but Amelia continued. I'm not here to apologize or justify my pregnancy. What you said in the meeting was cruel and unnecessary, and there's something you need to know. She took a deep breath, feeling courage build within her. The truth is, the father of my baby isn't you, it's Marcus, a friend who supported and respected me. Unlike you. The revelation hit Ed like a punch to the stomach. The shock on his face was undeniable. Victoria's eyes widened and a heavy silence filled the room. How could you do this? Ed shouted, anger rising to his head. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't want you to use it as a weapon against me, Amelia replied, her voice steady. I'm not a burden and you can't bring me down. I'm stronger than you think. Victoria watched the scene unfold, her heart torn between solidarity for Amelia and the possibility that her own life was about to crumble. The tension among the three was palpable, as if the air was charged with electricity. Amelia had finally found her voice, and Ed was now faced with the reality of his actions. You're going to have to deal with this, Ed, Victoria said, her voice low but firm. Things can't continue like this. You need to reflect on your life and your choices. It's not just the company's reputation at stake, it's the lives of real people. Amelia turned to leave, feeling relieved to have finally spoken out. The truth was out there, exposed, and now no one could ignore it. Ed stood still, a shadow of who he once was, while Victoria stared at him, hoping he would finally grasp the weight of his decisions. The dinner had turned into a turning point, and the future of everyone was about to change. The atmosphere in the Hastings mansion was charged with tension and anxiety. After Amelia's explosive revelation about the true paternity of her child, Ed Hastings felt as if the ground had opened up beneath him. He leaned against the dining table, trying to regain his composure. The gazes of Victoria and the guests were heavy, as if each was assessing not only his reputation but also his very essence. You can't just ignore this, Ed, Victoria said, her voice firm but laced with concern. What you did, the way you treated Amelia, this cannot continue. Ed, with a closed expression, looked away. I didn't do anything wrong, Victoria. She's just trying to get back at me for not giving her what she wanted. I'm not the father of the baby. That's all that matters. The arrogance still pulsed in his words, but a growing fissure in his confidence was evident. Can't you see? That's exactly what makes her so powerful now. You underestimated her and she rose up. That empowered her. The truth is, your arrogance has pushed her away from you and could cost you everything you've built, Victoria said, her tone increasingly intense. People are talking, Ed. You can't just hide behind your wealth and influence. And what do you suggest? That I bow to her and apologize? I won't give anyone that satisfaction, Ed replied, his voice trembling with rage. Meanwhile, Amelia was in her office, feeling the adrenaline from her recent revelation coursing through her veins. The truth that had finally come to light felt like a double-edged sword. On one hand, it brought freedom from Ed's oppression, but on the other, the new public scrutiny left her anxious. James, her ex-boyfriend, had been by her side from the start, offering unwavering support. Amelia, you have no idea the impact this has had, James said, a determined glint in his eyes. Now is the time to act. People are waking up to the reality of your situation. This could be your chance to fight for justice. Amelia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility. What if it all ends in disaster? What if Ed sues me? He has the resources to destroy me. James held her hands, looking into her eyes. Don't think like that, you're not alone. What he did was wrong, and there are many others who feel the same. You can be their voice. This could be your fight. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, Amelia murmured, hesitant. You're stronger than you think, James insisted, his gaze unwavering. Your art, your struggle, all of it speaks for you. And now, with a child on the way, you have an even greater reason to fight. Translation. In a moment of clarity, Amelia began to realize that the fight was not just for herself, but for all the women who had ever felt oppressed and invisible in the corporate world. She stood up determined. All right, let's do this. Back at the mansion, Ed was in an emotional whirlwind. He turned to Victoria, his voice trembling. What will people think of me? I'm a Hastings. This is unacceptable. Victoria crossed her arms, her penetrating gaze fixed on him. And what does that say about you? That you have no control over your actions? That you can't take responsibility for how you treated people? Your reputation is already at risk. You need to start being a better person, Ed, or you'll lose everything. Ed's phone vibrated on the table, interrupting the conversation. He glanced quickly, and his heart sank. It was a notification about an article stating that Amelia's story was gaining traction on social media. People were starting to mobilize. This can't be happening, Ed murmured, rubbing his forehead. I can't let this take me down. You put yourself in this position, Victoria replied, her voice now softer but still fie. It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions. You need to choose now. Continue down this destructive path or seek redemption. As Ed struggled with his emotions, Amelia and James were preparing to take the next step. The battle was just beginning, and the revelations that had emerged promised to change not only their lives but also the system that allowed men like Ed to continue reigning with impunity. Amelia was determined not to be a victim. She was ready to be a force for change. The scandal involving Ed Hastings was spreading like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. With each new revelation, the pressure on him intensified, both inside the company and outside of it. The boardroom of Hastings Enterprises was filled with nervous executives and anxious journalists. The atmosphere was charged, and all eyes were on Ed, who sat at the center of the table, his expression tense and jaw clenched. Ed, you need to understand that this is not just a personal issue. It's affecting the company, said Sarah, the CFO, her voice trembling but firm. Our shareholders are worried and investors are considering pulling their funds. Ed took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. I know, Sarah, but what can I do? This is an attempt to take me down. The media is twisting everything. It's not just that, Ed, intervened Jonathan, the marketing director. Amelia is using the situation to galvanize support. She has become the voice of resistance against our toxic culture. She's an employee, not an activist, Ed exclaimed, slamming his hand on the table. We need to control this narrative immediately. If we don't, we'll all be in trouble. At that moment, the door opened and Victoria walked into the room. Her expression was one of determination, but also concern. Ed, we need to talk. Now. The murmurs in the room ceased, and all eyes turned to Victoria. Ed made a dismissive gesture with his hand. This isn't the time for this, Victoria. It's exactly the time, Ed. She stepped forward, challenging him with her gaze. What happened to you? Do you really think you can walk away from this situation unscathed? People are talking. I'm not responsible for how Amelia decided to handle this, Ed retorted, his tone rising. She's the one making a spectacle out of it all. You treated her like garbage, Victoria shot back, crossing her arms. And now look where that's led us. What are you willing to do to fix this? The tension in the room was palpable. Ed looked around, realizing he was losing control. What do you suggest, Victoria? That I bow down to her? That I apologize? That will never happen. Maybe it's time for you to reconsider your priorities, she replied, her voice calmer now, but still firm. You're about to lose everything because of your pride. Ed turned to the window, looking out at London's gray horizon. He felt isolated, an island surrounded by storms. What if I get rid of her? If I fire her, will that end it? You don't understand, Ed, Jonathan interjected. That would only make things worse. People support her. A firing would only add fuel to the fire. Victoria stepped closer to Ed, her tone softer. What do you really want? Power or respect? What are you willing to sacrifice? He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his decisions. The image of Amelia, with her art and her struggle, appeared in his mind. Her voice echoed in his thoughts, challenging him to confront his own weaknesses. I don't know, he admitted, vulnerability shining through. Then maybe it's time for you to confront who you really are, Victoria said, her voice now almost a whisper. You need to decide who you want to be. For your family, for your employees, and for yourself. Ed finally turned to face his wife, his expression revealing a man in conflict. I can't lose everything I've built. My reputation, my company. But at what cost? Victoria questioned. If you don't change, you'll lose more than that. You'll lose yourself. As Ed wrestled with his thoughts, his phone vibrated again, breaking the tense silence. It was a message from James, one of the employees who had joined Amelia's fight. Social media is ablaze, Ed. Support for Amelia is only growing. It's time to act. Ed looked at the screen, feeling despair tighten in his chest. He was at a crossroads, and every choice he made could lead to irreversible consequences. What do I do? He murmured to himself, as the room remained silent, waiting for his response. The atmosphere in the Hastings mansion was heavy and charged with unspoken tensions. Ed, once the center of attention, now found himself isolated in his own castle of sand, threatened by the waves of a scandal he had helped create. Meanwhile, Victoria, his wife, walked through the house with an air of determination that he could not ignore. The distance between them was becoming more palpable, as if an invisible wall separated them. You need to understand that your behavior can't continue like this, Ed, Victoria said, her tone firm but her voice low. She stopped in front of him, arms crossed over her chest. What you did to Amelia, the way you humiliated her, it's not just unacceptable, it's shameful. I did what was necessary to protect the company, Ed replied, his arrogance sounding like a distant echo of the man he used to be. He looked away, unable to face the woman he once loved. Protect the company? Or protect your image? Don't you see that all of this is just a facade? People are starting to see through you, Victoria retorted, her piercing gaze unwavering. And I don't want to be part of it. Ed felt a chill in his stomach. He had surrounded himself with people who only praised him, who kept him in his bubble of power. But now, the truth was coming to light, and he was losing everything he had built. Victoria, please, we can't discuss this now. I need to focus on business. Business? You still don't understand that your business is crumbling because of your choices? The only thing you're holding on to with all your might is your pride, she replied, her voice trembling with contained emotion. I cannot support you if you continue on this path. Meanwhile, Amelia was in a nondescript cafe downtown, surrounded by a warm atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the coldness of the corporate whir. She looked out the window, watching the bustling street, and for the first time felt a breath of hope. The weight of shame began to lift, and she felt stronger with each passing day. Marcus, her artist friend, was sitting across from her, his gaze soft and encouraging. Are you thinking about what happened? Marcus asked, breaking the silence following her reflection. Yes, about everything. About Ed, about the baby, about what comes next, Amelia replied, shaking her head. I feel like I'm finally ready to stand up and fight. I can't let him define my story. Exactly. You have a voice and you should use it, Marcus encouraged, leaning forward. Your work in the exhibition was incredible. People need to hear your story. I want to do more. I want to create a space where other women, especially women like me, feel valued and heard, Amelia confessed, her eyes shining with determination. I'm thinking about starting my own company focused on diversity and inclusion. That's wonderful, Amelia. You have to do it, and I want to stand by your side, Marcus said, a smile lighting up his face. You are not alone in this. Amelia smiled, feeling like she was finally finding her way. Her past would not define her, but rather her future actions. The conversation invigorated her, and the idea of building something new began to take shape in her mind. Meanwhile, James, who had joined a group of former colleagues, was determined to fight against the oppressive practices Ed had instituted. During a clandestine meeting in a discreet cafe, he observed the expressions of his coworkers, all sharing stories of discrimination and harassment. We need to act, and we need to act fast, James said, his voice firm. What Ed did to Amelia is not an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern that we need to expose. But how? He has so much power, one of the colleagues questioned, uncertainty clear in his voice. We need to unite. Let's create a petition, gather support, and turn this into a movement. We cannot allow him to continue acting with impunity, James replied, his determination contagious. If Amelia can stand up and fight, so can we. James's words ignited a spark of hope among his colleagues. The struggle was not just hers. It was a collective effort to end the toxic culture that permeated Ed's company. Each of them had their stories, and together, they would form a powerful voice. As Amelia, Marcus, and James began to chart their new paths, Ed found himself increasingly surrounded by his own decisions. The house that had once been a symbol of his triumph was now becoming a reflection of his failures. The pressure mounted, and he knew time was running out. The future promised change, and he was about to learn a painful lesson about the true cost of power. The boardroom of Hastings Enterprises was filled with tension. Members, men and women with serious expressions, sat around a glass table that reflected the cold light of the chandeliers. Edward Ed Hastings, a shadow of the man who once dominated that space, stood in a corner, his posture slumped, his eyes lost in the void. The humiliation he had inflicted on so many was now coming back to him, and the irony of fate was almost palpable. "Mr. Hastings, your conduct in recent months has been unacceptable," began one of the directors, a gray-haired man with a stern expression. "The scandal involving your assistant and the allegations of discrimination cannot be ignored. We need to think about the future of the company." Ed took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. I understand everyone's concerns, but this isn't just about me. It's about the company we built together. I am the only one who can save it." "Save? You mean save your own skin?" interrupted a middle-aged woman, her look conveying disdain. "Your arrogance has destroyed the trust of our investors. It's time for you to go." Ed felt the weight of those words like a death sentence. He shook his head, trying to find the right words. "I can change. Give me a chance. I can redeem myself." "There's no more time for promises, Ed. We are deciding on your termination," stated the director firmly. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group, and Ed felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. He looked at each of them, searching for a look of compassion but found only indifference. "You can't do this. I am Hastings. This company is mine." He raised his voice, but the determination of the directors was unwavering. One of them stood up with a firm expression. "You are no longer the figure this company needs. Your termination is effective immediately." Those words resonated like a distant echo for Ed, who found himself alone in a room that had once been his fortress. He turned and left the room with heavy steps, each movement laden with deep humiliation. As the door closed behind him, the weight of his downfall hit him like a tidal wave. Outside, Amelia Johnson was about to experience a moment of celebration. She had been invited to an event where she would receive the Entrepreneur of the Year award. The venue was elegantly decorated, and the atmosphere pulsed with vibrant energy. Marcus and James stood by her side, their hands intertwined with hers, sharing in that significant moment. "You look amazing, Amelia," Marcus said, admiring her with a look that mixed affection and respect. "You deserve this more than anyone. Your art, your struggle, it was all worth it." "Thank you, Marcus. I just hope my story inspires others," Amelia replied, her eyes shining with emotion. "I never thought I would get this far, especially after everything I've been through." James, always by her side, added, "You didn't just survive, Amelia. You rose up and became a symbol of change, and this is just the beginning." When the moment for the award arrived, Amelia stepped onto the stage, her heart racing. Receiving a standing ovation, she felt the energy of the audience. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady. "Today is not just a personal victory. It is a victory for all the women who have been silenced, for those who have faced discrimination, and for everyone who believes in a more just future." Amelia's words resonated in the room, and she saw faces nodding in agreement. "And let no one ever forget that even in the darkest situations we can rise and shine. True strength lies in our ability to overcome." Meanwhile, Ed was at home, surrounded by a loneliness he had never known. He looked in the mirror and saw a defeated man. "What have I done with my life?" he murmured to himself, the reflection becoming an internal storm. "I let power and arrogance blind me." As Amelia celebrated her new life, Ed found himself in a sea of regret. The truth had caught up with him, and he realized that true legacy wasn't in his wealth, but in the relationships he had destroyed. Somewhere, amidst his downfall, he understood that forgiveness and redemption were possible, but they would require a journey he never imagined he needed to take. Empowered and fulfilled, Amelia looked to the future with hope and determination, surrounded by those who supported her. In a moment of reflection, she made a promise to herself, to never let anyone bring her down again. Her story was now one of resilience and the strength that lies in dignity. We've come to the end of this moving story. If you enjoyed it and want to see more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Right now, there's a playlist of videos on your screen. If you want to keep watching these touching stories, just click on it and you'll start watching. And now, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and leave a like to support our work. Now, a sincere question. Do you agree with what happened in the story? We want to hear your opinion. Until the next video.